Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets fall once again, this time at the hands of the Milwaukee Bucks. However, there are themes around sluggishness to start games, to start halves. There's also, though, positives around what they were doing defensively and the way that we think this team can continue to grow on the offensive end. We will, of course, also discuss a little bit of a nuclear moment for Steve Nash as the Nets are looking at physicality this season and what it means to be an imposing team on both ends of the floor for 48 minutes.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered at Doug Norrie on Twitter if you want some of those little witty quips that he likes to provide for you sometimes. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack at Adam Armbrecht. I'm a little more sultry on Twitter, but friends, as we thank you for making us your first listen today, free on all those great platforms, that Doug, this one maybe isn't as frustrating of a loss as the prior two have been this season. You and I have been grappling, I think, with the emotions of the Brooklyn Nets and what it's going to mean to cover them here, especially early this year.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is look. They did not get handed any favors here to start the season. They've had four now very tough matchups. With teams that are all going to the playoffs, some with championship aspirations. Bucks being one of them. They fall 110-99. There's definitely positives we can take. I know some people are not going to want to hear that. There are plenty of negatives to take. Maybe people want to hear that more. I don't know if we got some Schadenfreude going on in Nets world right now, or if we're just going to try to keep a steady hand. You and I have gone back and forth about how we want to play this beginning of the season. And some of that I think is just therapy. It's like pre-show therapy. Yeah. I don't know if it's like emotionally hedging before something might happen, about talking, like you and I have shared a lot of texts about, positivity, and how maybe like Nets fans, we could all have, keep a little more positivity in our life. It's just basketball. Let's do it. And then you go out and you lose by 11. And you're like, 16 ways they could have won this game and we'd be having a win. I mean, the pod's better when they win for sure. But in general, yeah, like it's super disappointing loss, because the thing is right now, and the Nets are, I believe, a good team, and every game they go into the season is going to feel like a game they should win. That is where you want to be as a team. It's worked out 25% of the time so far to start the season. So I don't know where that leaves us, but I think there's plenty of positives to take away, and I think there's also parts of this game that, if you're looking for things that the Nets haven't cured yet, this game showed you plenty of those also.
Yeah, listen, when you have Kevin Durant and you have Kyrie Irving, stop there, right? You always expect that when you start a game, we could win this. That's the nature of having two of the best players in the league. So the level of being frustrated early season here is obviously a part of it, but you mentioned the opponents, and it's not a cop-out. It's just, we talk about exchanging our texts, and we're going to get into the start of this game for the Brooklyn Nets and the start of the second half, and why there is a bit of a theme developing there that could be concerning. But exchanging those texts, like, I also remember, and I said it on the podcast, so it's hard to run away from it. I said, give me 15 to 20 games before I really develop a concrete assessment of the team. That is still what I believe and what I'm going to do. And also, moment to moment, game to game, I do have slight moments of freakouts. Which,
well, by the way, it's a lot easier to do that when you're 4-0. Like, right. When you're
I'll see you in 20 games, guys. It's fine. It's all good.
It's like I told you, I'm just going to reevaluate it with a game 20. When you're 4-0, it's super easy to say that. When you're 1-3, it becomes a little harder, and it just chips away at you a little more. But sorry, I cut you off there. But you mentioned it. Like, first and third quarters, I do think this is becoming just on a high level. Do you think we're just seeing a theme here with this team? They seem to struggle out of the gate, and they've gotten absolutely smashed the last two third quarters of games. The Grizzlies killed them, and then the Bucks did the exact same. Do you think this is a high level problem, just small sample size? Because I don't know.
It's hard for me to decide which is more frustrating for me. Right? Like, on the one hand, the start of the game, the tip-off, like, hey, if you're not locked in to start the game, where's the expectation level here, right? Now, when you're playing a tough team like Milwaukee, there's going to be elements that are frustrating, and we're going to talk later about, obviously, developing chemistry on this team still, but that's frustrating. But coming out in the third quarter, and you mentioned the Grizzlies game, now both games where they're leading at the break, and then they lose it in the third. They lose the games in the third quarter. So it's the second time that you've done a great job of, even after your sluggish starts, which I know where I am now. I can forgive starting sluggish, working your way into the rhythm of the game, finding yourself, figuring out what's going to work in some matchups. Okay, great. But when you come out in the third quarter and you have the lead, you should be able to identify ways that you can frustrate a team defensively and still have consistency on the offensive end, especially when you're operating with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. That, I think, is the more inexcusable of the two, and something that if it does become a running theme, it's going to be hard to come back from that. We've seen this story before with this team in previous seasons, where once they got down, it was hard for them to get the defensive stops when they needed it and find ways to have success offensively.
Yeah, these teams are just too good. Like the NBA is just too good now. Like you cannot take full quarters of these momentum shifting games, especially on the road. Like these two games in Memphis and in Milwaukee, they're going to have super live crowds. The crowds really get up for these games. If you just let these teams back into it, and look, at this day and age, having even like a double-digit lead for some teams is really not that big of a hill to climb. You can erase these really quickly with the three ball, right? A little bit of pace and a few threes, and a double-digit lead can go away. But if you've done all the work to have a lead at halftime, right, and you've done some of the hard work, and you have a chance to really just at least put them on the ropes in the third quarter, you have to do it to do the opposite, to like let these teams fully back into the game, and then let the crowd get back into it, which I'm as numbers driven as anybody. I still think this is part of it. Like the momentum that these teams are able to grab onto, it's just such a killer. And you mentioned, I guess we'll talk more about Kyrie and KD shortly here. Then you start pressing, you start doing all these things, like you get into these situations where you start, like, you feel like you need to you're more in a bailout situation. Like you start playing their game instead of your game. It just has this absolute ripple effect all the way down. And is it coaching? Is it motivation? Is it bad luck? Is it small sample? I don't know. I could hear really any one of those combinations. And if a smart person was telling me, I could buy into it. Like it wouldn't matter. Just choose one of them. I buy into it. But it all comes down to the same thing. Like they're not giving games away, but they're just not fully engaged enough. And these third quarters are becoming a problem.
And I tell you too, man, excuse me, get a little choked up about the whole situation. I'll say too, and by the way, welcome into everybody in the YouTube live, where we're having a great time for the post game, and we'll obviously be running after we wrap our official episode, as we always do. The other thing that you mentioned there is like it's not even that you're losing the leads in the third quarter. It's that like the third quarter is for burying teams. You're supposed to take that third quarter and say, by the time you get to the fourth, guys, you're going to really be pressing to try to get back into this one. And instead they end up on their heels. And I think what I wonder a lot, especially with Kevin Durant, maybe less with Kyrie because he missed so many games last year, but overall, I think the theme serves for both of them, is they haven't had the good supporting cast. And we know they're still waiting for Seth Curry to come back, and there's new pieces on this team. But when you start to lose that lead, and when you feel like things are getting away from you a little bit, I think it's really easy for the superstar talents to go, all right, it's my job now. And it doesn't mean that that's the wrong answer. The problem is that in that third quarter, we saw pressing for and taking not ideal shots. And when it's a non-superstar player, you say that's a terrible shot. What are you doing? When it's a superstar player, you say it's a terrible shot unless it goes in. And I think that that's a lot of what they're running into here as well, which is concerning, because there was also in that third quarter, I believe it was the third quarter, when we're staying on theme here, there was another sample size where Kevin Durant is off the court and the Brooklyn Nets actually went on a run. And I have no idea what to make out of that outside of flukiness and balancing with what the other team is doing and who's on the floor. But it happened in the Toronto Raptors game, 23-10 run, which was led by Nicholas Claxton. And it happened again in this one. I don't have the exact numbers, but that's just a weird stat that is really hard to wrap your head around, because now we're talking about when your best player isn't on the court, maybe some things are working for you, but you're also losing these quarters. It's just, I want to lean on small sample size, and that's what makes it hard to really parse out what is true in these first four games versus what is a blip that just needs to be ironed out through coaching, practice, and reps.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, anytime you're winning minutes where Durant's on the bench, I think it's just going to be a small sample size. He's just too good. He's just too good to to have that be the case over the long haul, right? Like, you're just going to win more games than you're not. And and there's just two different kinds of superstars sort of pressing here, because you had Giannis on the one hand, he kind of just fully takes over the third quarter, right? They had kind of kept the reins on him for the most part. and he just went full bully mode. And look, was some of the officiating questionable here? For sure. I think this is more like about the Giannis experience than it is about like questionable refereeing. And there were some definite calls. When you're on the other side of a Giannis kind of game like this, it's going to seem like everything's a foul. I don't know. It's hard for me to go too nuts. I do want to talk about the Nash thing, though. That's like one of these things that that I think we want to get into. But just in general, I think that's kind of like a bug, not a feature about Durant's time off the court. And I think it does to some degree show you that the Nets have a good enough team to be able to withstand it, right? Like this is a talented team. Like this team has talent.
In some ways that should be encouraging.
This team is built like almost really totally correctly. Like, yeah, they could use a few more spots here, stretch 5, another shooter, all this other stuff. But like for the most part, this team has talent. It's not surprising to me that a team that has this personnel could go on runs with Durant off the court. It's just we just haven't seen them be able to fully sustain this stuff over multiple games now. I mean, they just pulled it off in Toronto. I don't know if you want to call this game ultimately a blowout. I know they lost by 11. I knew with 3 minutes left, it was over. So maybe that counts as a blowout. So maybe they've been kind of blown out 3 times now and they've won a close game. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I know we have more to talk about here. I do want to talk more about KD and Kyrie and just sort of like the load that's being put on these guys once again.
As well as Ben Simmons in this game too, right? His performance too matters here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're going to talk about Simmons. We'll talk about Nash. We got a ton of stuff. Thanks for everyone for jumping in over there on YouTube. Fire off the questions. We'll close out our regular show and we'll keep going for all those folks on YouTube. In the meantime, let me tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. Not like those other operators where you're kind of jamming salaries. You're up against a bunch of sharks. You're not really sure if you're getting it good or not. That's not the case over on Prize Picks. You're making entries on Prize Picks and you're just putting up against their player projections, going more or less on the numbers that they have. It's just you versus Prize Picks. That's it. Super easy. No salaries. None of that other rigmarole. Prize Picks has made it super easy. You go more or less on points, more or less on assists, rebounds, blocks, steals, and that's just for basketball. You get all the football stuff over there as well. All you do, you pick 2 to 5 players. You decide if they're going to go more or less than their Prize Pick projections, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. 10x, baby. Prize Picks is making you want to get in there every single day with this stuff. NBA, NFL, MLB while the World Series is going on. NHL, PGA, it's all there. And the list for Prize Picks goes way longer than I want to spend time on the podcast. Just know they are fully ramped up with all the sports over there. You go to prizepicks.com. You sign up. You're going to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can get 100% instant deposit match up to $100. You got to use the promo code LOCKED ON, just like our podcast network. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit 50, Prize Picks will give you 50. You can do the math all the rest of the way up and down. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKED ON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
Okay, so then I think so that is speaking negatively around how this game starts, how they come out of the second half, and ultimately lose the game. So it's easy to trend negative. That being the case,
glass half full, me guy. Let's go.
Here we go. Come on now, fill me up. I do think, though, if you are sitting here saying Ben Simmons integrating with the team, figuring stuff out, new pieces, waiting for injured players, there are still moments and there are still sequences and there are still stretches over 4, 5, 6 minutes, over entire quarters that you look and see the version of this team that can be very successful consistently on a game-to-game basis. I think maybe it's even better to start on the defensive end because we talked about this before we got into it, where you mentioned, I actually think they played a pretty strong game on that end of the court, especially against Giannis and the Bucks.
Yeah, it's crazy to say when Giannis puts up 43 that the opposing defense did well. I think they mostly did. I think for the most part, they had a game plan here that they stuck with. They made it very difficult in the lane, especially early for him. He had a really tough first quarter. First half. I think he and Drew had combined for like 15 or 16 points at halftime or something like that. Maybe it was a little bit more. But in general, they were really making life difficult for these guys early. I thought the switching was way better. I think that they were able to bring doubles in a really effective way. I think that they showed you that the length against certain teams is going to be a problem. strong when they can really dial it all together. I thought Simmons did a good job on defense. This is a very, very difficult defensive assignment you have here. Maybe one of the toughest, if not the toughest in the whole game for his kind of play. And they did switch the action a little bit with him. But yeah, like 110 points. Bucks shot 26% from three. The closeouts were pretty good. Second chance points obviously always rear their ugly head. I can't really make a ton of complaints about defense. And again, I understand that Giannis dropped a 40 burger on their heads. And I know that that's where the game kind of got away from them. I'm with you though, that I think there's positives to draw on this just in general. I'll leave it this way. I don't think it's the defense is the reason they lost.
Right.
if I'm trying to figure this out, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about, we'll discuss Ben Simmons here in a second, about obviously getting him into the rhythm of the offensive side of the ball, you want to at least be able to say, well, what's the one thing we know he does well and in effect can help the team do well? It's the defense. And listen, 43 points for Giannis, 15 for Holiday. Nobody else in the starting lineup has double digits, and you get a big performance from Bobby Portis coming off the bench. Like, again, box score is not the way to analyze a game unto itself, but when you look at it, you go, hey, we weren't getting beat left, right, and center here. One superstar player got his, as you anticipate happening. And there are a couple of things on the defensive end that I think worked well for the Nets and Ben Simmons as well. But we saw this early in this game, and I wondered if we talk about adjustments and figuring out how can we be more effective? How can we get out in transition? Well, Kyrie Irving had 9 rebounds in this game, all of them in the first half, and they were all defensive rebounds. So when you go and you look at a stat line for Ben Simmons, which the numbers are low from a scoring perspective, and he only ends up having 5 total rebounds, 4 on the defensive end. But this is something you and I discussed 2 episodes ago. You had a great discussion with Chris
Mulholland. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to space on his name, who's a good guy and a really good listen. So go check out that conversation. We discussed the idea of like, what is a more effective way to get from defense to the offensive end? It seems like there was an intention here to try to get bodies on the Milwaukee Bucks, let Kyrie Irving and some of the smaller players sweep in for the rebounds and start to trigger the offense. That is a good step in the right direction in terms of making an adjustment here, because we've seen in the first 3 games how Ben Simmons' quality defense and then having him be the trigger man has created sluggishness and clunkiness when you're trying to get over the offensive side.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I thought the transition game in the first half was really, really strong. The defense got some of that started. They were able to pressure the ball. They were able to force some turnovers. The Kyrie, he kind of stopped rebounding but there was not as many rebounds to be had because the Bucks made everything in the third quarter. So you're not going to get rebounds when Giannis is running a layup line on your team for the second half of the game. But if that's going to be sort of the way they want to operate and pushing the pace, that's going to work for this team really, really well. And so if we're taking other takeaways here that are of the positive nature, yeah, like that, it was awesome. Actually, right after I tweeted about it, he had 8 rebounds, then he grabbed the 9th one, and it was a perfect example because he grabbed the 9th one, pushed it all the way, went end to end and finished, and it got an and one. And it was just like, oh, are we going to be able to do this if this is kind of how we're going to attack the defensive end? You're going to lose the rebounding game a lot if you're going to have Kyrie try to be your primary rebounder. I don't think we're saying that that's what he should do. I'm just saying you can make this part of your game because they're going to have to, if the half-court offense is going to struggle at times, they're going to have to make this way more of a priority. Like there's going to have to be prioritized even more than ever. So again, maybe when the third segment here, we can talk about some of the negatives, but more. And maybe we're kind of just talking about them both at the same time. But it's just a situation where I can squint and see it with this team. Mm-hmm. It just hasn't come fully around yet. Like they haven't been able to put a full game together. I mean, guess Toronto. We've just seen it in too many snippets, and we've seen plenty of things to be like, hey, man, look, if this happens for three quarters or 3.5 quarters, they're going to win a lot of games. It's just that just hasn't been the case tonight. And maybe it's opponent, maybe it's just, gelling together. Maybe it's officiating. If you want to think that this game got officiated one way, maybe, but like whatever the reason is, I still do think there's plenty of pieces that we can take away from it.
Yeah, I think, yes, I agree with you. And to your point, we started talking positively about what they did defensively and then also acknowledge that things weren't perfect on the offensive end. But you said it in the right way of like, I've mentioned this before now. I feel like this could be a theme I use on the podcast, like the seeds for success. Like I think I see things that can be built on and can be successful for this team. But coming up here in a second, I'll ask you about an interesting stat line coming out of this game again that could be a running theme that is just it's weird. It's not alarming. And then we'll also discuss Steve Nash blowing up and the officiating in this game, not from a was it slanted one way or the other, but just what it means for the Brooklyn Nets to want to play a certain style with the personnel they currently have. Okay, so the quick question I had was, man, I went back into the box score here. I know it. I know that it's circumstantial, and I know that you'll tell me that it's circumstantial. Kevin Durant was a minus 17 in this game. Like in the old squinting, and I can see that can't be the truth about what Kevin Durant is, but he is now closer. He's closer to Ben Simmons plus minus numbers than anybody else on the team, I think. Like, I just don't know what to make out of that outside of, he's going to be on the court when the best players are on the court for Milwaukee, for the Grizzlies, for anybody. And when the team is losing games, effectively, his numbers are going to suffer more. But he's in the negative by a significant margin over anyone else on the team, which is just weird. It's just flat out weird.
Small sample. I think there was some weird stuff that went on. I mean, if you'll notice too, like their rotations changed pretty dramatically in this game from the first and the second period. Like they were playing the Sharp got minutes. They had the Mills piece in there. They Yuta played in the first half. I'm not saying any of this was good or bad. We saw Sumner come in with like a super weird lineup early on that made like no sense. It was like Sumner, Mills. What was it? Sumner, Mills, Harris, maybe Simmons, and somebody else. I had it written down. I'll get it. It was Simmons, Sumner, Mills, Kyrie, Daron Sharp. Like it was just like weird stuff that we hadn't seen, which I don't mind like throwing a bunch of different stuff on just early on in the season, see what sticks. You got a couple like run hot threes from Yuta and stuff like that. With Durant, look, it's Kevin Durant. I'm not gonna go crazy about his plus minus.
It's just weird. That's all.
Yeah, you're right. It is a weird thing. I think some of that just can be just run bad and there's different combinations. Should we talk the Nash thing real quick? I'll quickly just say that like those rotations, because you mentioned it, we were texting about it and saying like, man, like odd looks here, and they're just kind of going through different bodies. I'm also fine with that to figure out what's going to unlock and work for you. And I think game to game, we talked about that matchup to matchup. You didn't have Morris available for you in this one. Daron Sharp, maybe you kind of get this. You're getting more of a sample size where he's going to struggle or have success. And then you mentioned Yuta Watanabe. Like, I don't know what his role is ultimately going to be, but these small sample sizes seem to be working for him. Maybe that's all that he's going to be destined for until we get the likes of Seth Curry and TJ Warren, et cetera, down the line. The Steve Nash piece. So this ties into the overall game where in the first half, and this is what I mean by Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, everybody talked about, we got to be dirtier, nastier, an edge. We got to play tougher. We got to be grittier. Morris said, that's what I'm here to be. Ain't nobody going to F with us now that I'm here. But Kevin Durant is not any bigger than he's ever been. Kyrie Irving is not a power forward. He's your guard, right? And Nicholas Claxton has put on weight, but he's still Nicholas Claxton. One of the things that I wonder about is you see some of the fouls, the chippiness, the back and forth. Most of them aren't going the Brooklyn Nets ways, it feels like. Giannis is just a big physical player. And I wonder if there is a buildup over the course of games when you come out in the second half, the third quarter. Maybe there's a letdown because you're trying to go physical with teams that are just bigger and stronger with you. And then there's the foul calls and there's the frustration. And Kevin Durant's getting bounced around like a rag doll because that's what he looks like when he gets hit hard in the lane. That, to me, is what felt like the Steve Nash Tech throw-out ejection from this game was the culmination of all of it, even though in the moment it was about being confused that he, in fact, was the man who was being given the technical by the ref. Yeah, I can see what you can see it building because the Simmons call, like 2 plays or maybe couple minutes before, where he gets a foul on Giannis, where he clearly doesn't foul him, and
Nash is already talking about that,
and they're already and Simmons gets teed up for that, and then or maybe he didn't get teed up for that one. He didn't get teed up for that one. He got teed up for something else, and then
in the first half he gets teed up in a long 5-second delay. That was another problem too of like when are these calls coming? It's fine, foul, not a foul, tech, not a tech, but they were certainly taking a bit of a 10 Mississippi before delivering some of these
for sure. And then I mean overall too, like the foul game was pretty much even here, 24-22. It wasn't like hugely lopsided. It feels that way, I think, because the Nets had probably a few more questionable ones that went against them. But you're right. In general, like when a big physical team is going to play physical with you, it's going to seem like it's not, it's going to have a discrepancy in the fouls. I did like to see the fire from Nash here. We haven't really seen that from him much ever. That's the first time he's been ejected as a Nets coach. It did, as we talked about, I think we talked about this off air, right? It was that he seemed like he got more mad about the original tech than he was at like why he got teed up in the first place.
Yes.
Right?
I think the nature of it was like, what was that foul call that you just called there? Okay, you're arguing we're going to tee you up. And then he's like, no, but explain to me what the foul call was. And who was that tech on? The tech's on you. Me? And that's when first time we learned that Steve Nash has many deep shades of red when he gets angry. He was being, I mean, I was, again, I said, I don't know what these moments mean, if anything at all, probably nothing. But you've got Royce O'Neal holding Steve Nash back. I mean, he was physically being held back from the referees. I do think that sometimes things like this matter in the sense of this is a team trying to figure a lot of stuff out. And you can go one of two ways, right? Everyone can start spitting venom around everybody else. You can go back and listen to the pregame conversations from everybody. Everyone is talking about what they're responsible for, what the team needs to do together. They're all still staying on the same page. So this moment also kind of feels like Steve Nash being like, hey, we're all staying on the same page here. You guys are effing us, whether it's true or not from the referees. You're sending a message. This game was BS. And hopefully that's like a little bit of a drive here for the Brooklyn Nets to come out and be stronger in games going forward. The cliche stuff that we typically don't like to lean in on.
It did remind me of it was a few years ago, Brett Gardner for the Yankees got kicked out of a game where he was like walking back. I don't know if you ever saw this. He's walking back into the dugout and someone gets kicked out of the game. And he's like, who just get kicked out of the game? And one of the coaches was like, it was you. And he was like, what? And he just loses. And then like, it didn't seem like he had done anything. He got tossed. And then when he finds out he's been tossed, he just completely loses it. Looks like he's going to like commit a felony against one of the umpires. That's what it reminded me against Nash. I do like to have seen the fire. I did not think that was really in him. So I'm here for that part of it. In general, I thought like their game plan, if I'm just going to give Nash some compliments here, I thought the game plan was overall pretty well, even if some of the rotations were super head scratchers. Some of them kind of like Sumner played fine in the few minutes he went in. Yuta, they got a few miracle minutes out of Yuta. I mean, it wasn't all bad. It's hard for me to go crazy. I still think we probably have to talk. Maybe it's like, I'll save it for another podcast or later in the week because we're on a back-to-back and we're going to probably run out of time here. Like the half-court offense is still like, we still have just such major questions about Simmons in this thing like that. Maybe we don't have time to get into now. And you want to say that goes on the coaching. I think it does, but I don't know. There's a million ways we could go here, but in general, at least the fire, like sometimes you wonder if Nash is like what's going through his head some of these games in terms of like the energy level, if it's more than just a couple claps and that's just what it's going to be. At least from there, we got to see a different side of him. It didn't do anything. Like didn't fire anybody up. They went on getting smoked in the third quarter.
And now with Jacques Vaughn at the helm, we'll continue to not come back and win this game. I know what you mean, though. It is nice to see some of those things from them. I think just to close it, as you say, we'll get another sample size here, which actually I think is a good thing. Like getting a back-to-back sample size where you can say, okay, now do we see things that are connecting through on this game-to-game basis? The other thing was like, I'm not reading anything into it. They were talking pregame, showing Steve Nash working with Ben Simmons out at the top of the arc, just talking about, I think, positionally. It looked to me, if I'm reading the way the body language was, it was about what you're trying to do when you're setting these screens, where we want you to go after you set the screens, how to avoid getting some of these ticky-tack fouls potentially. And even to your point about, if I'm going to pay the compliment overall, but you have to go as far as you can with whatever the best version you think or thought was going to be for this team. Ben Simmons running the point. Okay. Well, it can't be you pull the plug after 3 games or after 4 games. You have to go far enough to feel like it's going to work or not work. Now, I said coming into this one when you and I were talking that, hey, maybe, and we saw a little sample, especially in transition, maybe there needs to be an effort here to treat, and I don't mean this in a one-to-one comp, but treat Ben Simmons more like Nicholas Claxton, at least for the majority of offensive sets. You want him off ball. You want him working in space. You want him attacking down at the basket. Now, that means it's going to change how you can have Claxton and Simmons on the floor at the same time together, and that's okay. But you can only take this so far before maybe the smarter approach is going to be, let's ask Ben to be responsible for less initially offensively and then incrementally introduce more responsibility as it feels like the rhythm is coming here. Because the one thing we know we can do is put the ball back in Kyrie Irving's hands for the majority of the time and tell him, you have to helm this thing until we feel comfortable to hand it off and until we get a guy like Seth Curry back too, who at least has some of that ball handling ability.
Yeah, and just shooting and like his like a little more of a 3-level threat. I mean, he's not a full 3-level threat, but he's Right now they have 2 3-level guys, and that's it. And then
that's why Sumner looked so sexy when he got out there, because you were like, oh, this guy did a couple things, got at the basket. Like, it wasn't all perfect, but you just you realize that they're lacking that piece right now.
Right. Well, they have 2 3-level guys, and they have a bunch of 1-level guys. Like, they just have a bunch of guys that can't do anything except for dunk or shoot threes. Like, those are the only. That's like the only kind of guys they have. And you're still. I mean, maybe Sumner's like, I don't know. I'm not even sure about that. I haven't seen enough of his minutes. But
he's a feather in the breeze too, though.
Just in general, right? In general, they could stand to have one more guy. I will say, like, close it out here. There was a sequence in the second half. They closed with Simmons at the 5, and they actually went on a really nice run. It was like a 16-8 or 16-7 run during that time. And I was like, okay, like, can we build on some of this stuff? Can we build on where we make this like really difficult? We just really pace you and really just kind of spread the floor a little bit and make it really difficult. I think we'll see more of that stuff as the season goes on. Again, we're 4 games out of 82 into this thing. This is a long haul. Like, the Celtics sucked until, the new year last year, and then they made it to the finals, right? Like, they didn't suck, but like they weren't the Celtics, right? It takes some time to pull some of this stuff together, and I think we're still seeing that. And I think as long as we can try to pull on some threads here, we can not pull our hair out, right? because what are you going to do? Like, we're going to lose our minds here about, every single game like this. They're 1-3. If they're 1-20, let's start freaking, like if they're 1-10, let's start freaking. But I still don't think we're there yet. If I'm just really being honest and really taking a second and stepping back for this, I'm saying it's an 82 game season. This takes a long time. This group has not played together. This can happen. They've had tough matchups here. There have been super red flag things for sure. Now, I'm not saying there hasn't been. There have been major red flags with this team. Some that might not be correctable. Like we might never turn the corner. And with all that, this is still just game 4. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
no, you know why? And I'll even, yes, I agree with you. And here's the reason why. Kevin Durant's playing great basketball. Kyrie Irving's playing great basketball. Nicholas Claxton is clearly taking a next step in his game. Royce O'Neal is a great pickup that is complementary and is going to have a role here. And you're not fully healthy yet. So there are, like, when you just look around the team, you can say, hey, these guys are playing good basketball right now. There's still a lot of things to figure out. It'd be far worse if you came out and you said, boy, does it look like KD's gotten a little old? He looks a little slower than he used to be, right? Or that just by the composition of the roster, Kyrie Irving was having a harder time getting to his spots or finding his shots, whatever it may be. Or Nicholas Claxton having a huge regression where he looks lighter and thinner and less talented. Like, all those things could have gone a different way. Ultimately, 4 games. I'm back to it, Doug. I think we went, I don't know, a third of the cup full, not half.
This is self-therapy. That's all this is.
This wasn't about you guys, actually. We appreciate everyone when you support us, but this is mostly about me and Doug.
This is about us.
Back to neutral.
This is about us making sure we have the stamina to get through 82 games like this, because
we have 78 more of these things. Are we going to be okay?
No, we're going to be good, man. This is going to be good. I think I still have positive vibes here, even this is an L. Okay. Really appreciate everyone that jumped into YouTube. Tons of people in here. A lot of questions. Someone says something complimentary about here, so we'll get that person up first. And in the meantime, make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. Like I said, we're going to do the YouTube. The YouTube people are just going to get another extra podcast here in. That's what we've been doing every time we do a YouTube live after the game. For those regular pod listeners, go make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts as well.
To lose patience is to lose the battle. Mahatma Gandhi.
Oh my goodness, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow following the Dallas game, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Post-game show. I feel like I wish we had a whole other studio, Doug, to go into the post. Now we'll move away from the post-game desk. We put on a couple of smoking jackets, sit down in a couple of Barca lounges. I don't know. Bottom line is, if you're over
this one up,
there we go.
Kern Elliott. At least Doug does say things that make sense majority of the time. So, oh well, I don't know. A majority of the time that makes sense, I'll take that. So thanks, Kern. Appreciate it.
I like that you plucked that one out as, well, it was an aggressively positive comment over here. Let's get it up. Most of the time, Doug's doing an okay job. That's what we like to see out of us.
Most of the time, it makes sense. Not all the time. Who cares? Okay, no.
No, I think we always say this when we do the YouTube lives. If you put at Locked On Nets, that helps us kind of just jump them out there in the crowd. I think I see one up here. Now I looks like when I put this up, it's going to be a suspiciously familiar question. How many times do we have to get killed at the rim before we go get a legit rim protector? Now I am putting it up because you asked the question, and we appreciate you being involved. However, Doug and I have now consistently said on these that, again, just like we're talking about the sample size, it's too early for me to make the determination that you need this type of thing. By the way, like, I don't know, 65, 70% of the league needs a legit rim protector on their roster. It matters how you want to play. It matters the way in which you're functioning offensively and how that helps your defense. And again, like Doug said, the defense wasn't bad in this. Like, I don't look at this as being Kevin Durant had multiple blocks in this game. Claxton challenged guys at the rim. There's going to be harder matchups. I still don't. That is not my number one concern right now with this roster. I'll put it that way.
And Chris and I talked about it yesterday, and I'm probably in this camp too, is that I think that they probably will have to try to address this.
Yeah.
There just isn't an available guy right now. And so it's just not going to be addressed right now. I think we can probably leave it at, it would be really nice to have a stretch five. I think this is a fair thing. It would be a very nice and this is probably all I'm going to say from this. I'm just going to repeat this line. I'm going to record this and figure out some way I can just play this every time. I agree. Having a stretch five on this team would be a perfect compliment. I don't think right now that player is available at the right price. I do think we're going to see some version of teams needing to offload some guys, and there's going to be more available guys come trade deadline, right? Like, and I think we can just wait till then. There's just no one to get like this right now. That's going to fit the Nets style. That's it. Like, there's no one on the waiver wire that fits this kind of style for sure. And I don't think any team that would be willing. I don't think the teams that have these guys that maybe on the roster now are probably willing to trade them now. So I think it's just a wait and see. I think that's just where we are. Would it be nice to have
go back to the quote at the end of the episode, right? Patient. Like, you have to be patient about it. I think that's the ultimate.
Yeah, duh. It's a huge duh. Like, of course. Like, if they have a 7-footer that could every once in a while hit threes, like every single team would want that. It's crazy to not say that. I'm just saying that the guys that are available aren't there. That's it.
We got a little Kern action coming in here. KD's plus minus is because of who they put with him. They put in Sharp, who played like S. Hey, keep it clean. Gosh darn it. We're on YouTube, for crying out loud. Mills, who scored 0 points, and Harrows, who had 3 points. I got to get that down now. You see, we can't put you up there. If you're going to use a little asterisk tag if you want to, I get it. I use some Fs with the ... Yes, I understand that. By the way, we said it in the episode. I'm not looking at the plus minus of Kevin Durant and going, it must mean that he should be on the bench. He should be a bench player. It's just that even maybe more importantly, because I think this does actually matter, is if you are pairing him with certain guys like Daron Sharp for bad minutes, or like Patty Mills, who is, guess what? Then Patty Mills shouldn't be playing as much. Then Daron Sharp shouldn't be on the court as much. And this is where I'll go back to making adjustments to what the rotations look like and tapping into some other players. Again, no Morris available in this one. I actually think this is a nice game for him to be a part of. You could have him go in there and give a little FU music to Bobby Portis. Like, that would have been the perfect time to use him in this. So that, I think, hurts them in this way, because this is not, as you said before, good games, bad games for Daron Sharp from a matchup standpoint. This was not good matchup matchup for Daron Sharp. So that's going to happen. I don't care about the plus minus for Kevin Durant. I do care about finding the right combinations when you flex Kevin Durant and Kyrie on and off the court.
Yeah, actually, I actually didn't even think that Daron was all that bad. I might be too much of a Daron apologist for this point. I might not be seeing.
He's fine. Well, no, you know what it is though too, because I'll also say on Daron, certain people in the fan base, and I'm a fan of all young players. We all know that, but I think that fans created a expectation of what Daron can ultimately be, which maybe he can. And he showed a great little play in this game that I think it actually got intercepted, or it fumbled out of bounds. He had a little backdoor cut from Kyrie Irving on the baseline that he worked across the top of the key and threw a little bounce pass in there. And they've talked about it on the broadcast about.
Oh, yeah, that was Kyrie's fault too.
Yeah, and Kyrie said it right. Kyrie took it on the chin because that's what it was. It was a miscommunication of Kyrie didn't think that Daron could get that ball in that spot, so he didn't go where he was supposed to. So there's good sample size of where he can improve, but I think you also, again, got to be patient with Daron. He'll get there. So when I see him on the court, I go, hey, high energy, grabbing some boards, doing some things, good enough for me. I think a lot of people are saying, why aren't you pulling up the shots, right? Where's the perimeter looks? Why aren't you the stretch five for us? It's not there yet. It's simple as that.
Yeah, it's hard for me to go too crazy on the sharp minutes here. I want to say one thing on Simmons that I didn't say during the regular podcast is that, again, I think this will become a running theme. We're saying about huge red flags that still exist for Simmons. This one is just still the same thing. You alluded to it, when the ball in the half court offense, when the ball stops with him and they just run this like mini, I don't even think it's like pistol, but it's like where it's like the dribble handoff into an action, which I thought that they should have been murdering the drop coverage on this all game, and they just couldn't fully take advantage. But one problem with Simmons that you'll notice, and this one actually, especially with a team like the Bucks that have really long defenders, especially point of attack guys like Drew Holiday or lightning quick guys like Javon Carter who can recover, is that what you did see early on, one thing that's going to look like stagnation with the Nets offense is that when Simmons has the ball at the nail or something like that, and he kind of is, even if he has kept his dribble, you can see everyone else having to do like 15 to 20% more work to get into a space because he's created negative space by the defender sagging 4 feet off him, right? And so when Simmons isn't going to punish a guy like Portis who's playing like legit like 3.5 to 4 feet off of him in that moment, it just means everyone else has to work like that much harder to fight through, even to get through screens, because there's just more bodies in the way. Like it just becomes such a more difficult thing. I would love some situation where the handoff screens plays aren't working. I think
it kind of ties in just a little bit of what you're talking about. I don't know if it's not necessarily that it's not working, but the functionality.
I think we saw it definitely does work. Like that does work. It's just at times where you need to switch it up, or when they're not running that and the defender sagged at him and he doesn't really want to get like a head of steam downhill. He has to be. I was joking around before, but I was like, we should just start a fund where we just pay $1,000 to his charity every time he gets to the foul line. Who cares if he makes it? Just get to the foul line so that teams will at least think that that's what's going to happen. Like you might get blown by. Maybe you'll get blocked. Like maybe he'll get blocked, or maybe he'll get an offensive foul, or maybe he'll get to the line, or maybe he'll just put up a bad looking shot. Like who cares? They have to believe it's going to happen. And he's too good. Like Simmons is so good. His court vision is elite. He's huge. Like he has all these prerequisite skills to be able to try to get to the basket and really create real problems for the opposing defense. And he just won't do it, even when they are legit daring him to do it. Like Bobby Portis for long stretches in this game was just daring him. It was like,
and there was two key moments. One was a great example in transition when he was off the ball, he got it and went at the basket, and he actually did a layup. He didn't throw it down. But then early in the game, went as you about daring them to do it. They're sagging back into the paint. He did not get up ahead of steam and charge the lane. He kind of shuffled himself down in there, walked himself basically into the double team with Portis and with Giannis, and lost the ball. And again, it's just that mentality of just attacking. So to your point, it's just like, I don't know what isn't necessarily working or not working, because I'm not seeing the full execution of it the way you're drawing it up. You're not drawing it up for Ben Simmons to be playing timid around the top of the key and then picking up his dribble and holding onto the ball.
They just have to be able to try. He just has to be able to try it. Like he has to try. He has to it has to try and have it look bad. I don't even actually think it will look that bad. Like, but I don't know.
No. And it's weird too. Like, two things, because he reached for his back the second time. He did in the other game too, where he reached for his back after coming down after a play. They referenced it. And I think a lot of it is, again, something like when Kevin Durant gets shouldered in his shoulder by Giannis and just kind of shake it off. I don't think we haven't seen anything be concerning about it. We haven't heard anything about it. So from that standpoint, I think, he's still in the clear. He said coming into the season, he was 100%. Kevin, there's a thing here about acknowledging we have too many of the same guys that do the same things. Hard to meet needs being one dimensional. I disagree with the sense that, again, right now, without having Seth Curry available, that changes where we kind of stand as far as the types of players you have available to you. And in this particular game, no Morris, I'm not elevating what his value is supposed to be. The area that I think they are, you want to say one-dimensional, is if you think Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton, and Daron Sharp, these are your quote-unquote bigs, and none of them, and someone else mentioned this question, like at some point just taking a shot of some kind. I do think Nicholas Claxton did play point guard, once upon a time, and he was a point forward. He was the Ben Simmons role on high school teams and into college. At some point, I do think, just like you're talking about, Ben Simmons just needs to attack and go to the line, make or miss them, just do the thing. At some point, Daron Sharp and Nicholas Claxton in their minutes, especially Claxton, because he's getting major minutes, you got to take a shot of some kind. You have to just do something that suggests when you get the ball in and around just inside the arc, it's more than holding and waiting for the player to come to you or to look for that next opportunity. And that's the one difference. It's funny. Those three players and all the different versions that they are, Daron Sharp has more passing ability than Nicholas Claxton. Nicholas Claxton has more attacking ability right now than Ben Simmons does. Ben Simmons has far better court vision than X. You know what I mean? Like they all have these little elements that are going on right now. Obviously, Ben's the one that has all of the requisite skill sets, but I do think at some point, Claxton specifically, you got to throw up a little hook. He showed it in the first couple of games. You got to do a couple little things that are scoring from outside, getting at the rim and attacking, just so that you get defenses to respect it a little bit more. Doesn't need to be effective all the time, just effective enough to be respected in some regard.
Yeah, they did try to switch up. They did try to stagger Simmons and Claxton's minutes a little more this game. Like they did break them up. I mean, I know they started the first and second halves of the game in the second half with them,
back
but
to
they
starting
did
5.
Yeah, but they did break their minutes up a little bit more. Like I said, Claxton didn't close the first half and this stuff. So I think, I mean, maybe we see more of that too. Like we're just more of a recognition that these guys, maybe it's just not going to work with them together, right? Like as much as you might get on the defensive end, which maybe they're just not getting enough of the defensive end to make it warrant it. It's close for me, but they probably aren't, right? Like I'm not saying they never could, but it might just not be enough to make up for the fact that it's just going to be really, really a problem on offense. And I think we're still seeing that. Like, if they're not in transition, it just looks, I mean, it's not like they haven't had some good sets in the half court. They definitely have, but it's nowhere near fluid enough. And the pairing of those two guys, maybe we see these. I don't think we get a starting lineup change because I don't think they have too many different bullets to fire when it comes to like how they could really affect it. I don't think you want to start Ben at the 5 like all game. I think that would be physically just a real problem for him. But in general, I do wonder if we're going to see more staggering these guys' minutes, because it'll be interesting to see what they do against Dallas, who's got sort of a different makeup too, because they start JaVale, but JaVale really only plays like 14 minutes a game. They play Christian Wood a ton more as like a stretch 5, sort of like Luka PNR guy. And he's been kind of murdering it at times. So it'll be interesting to see how they play. I think in that situation, you'll probably have to play kind of Simmons and Claxton a decent amount together again, just defensively to not get really crushed. So I'm interested to see how that works tomorrow.
And I wonder if a part of it is you can go to that Claxton, Ben Simmons, the starting lineup that they have right now, and with Royce O'Neal, by the way, and just say, this is if the defense proves to be good enough and the value is high enough on that end, this is when we want to put the clamps down for a 5-minute stretch. We can go to it, right? And we can use that 2 or 3 times a game. So these guys will end up playing 15 minutes together and then spread them out and try to create a little bit more fluidity. Again, if we're talking about needs, like ball handlers to me is also what you need here. Because if you're going to break these two guys up, then you have to find a way to still have Claxton on the court with guys that can get out and run with him and get him in good spots. I'll also, we'll talk about Jonathan Brown here, who I think really he's got something good here. We agree that Yuta needs more minutes, right? He's been plus on both ends of the floor. Without Seth and Morris, I feel like we need to get a greater need for him. Here's, again, I don't know why I hesitate. I really like Yuta Watanabe's game. I think he does enough of everything the right way that I could make a case right now that if you took away, and someone I think maybe said this, take away Patty's minutes and give them to Yuta. Like, you right now could go into this box score and I could tell you, rather than having Patty Mills play, he came in and played 18 minutes. Give 8 of those minutes to Yuta Watanabe, who
give all 18 to him.
But that's what I mean, right? Like, but you know what I'm saying? Like that's I can make that is the one argument I can make very easily, regardless of what anyone thinks about Yuta's ultimate value. Having him on the court on both ends of the floor makes so much more sense in any scenario than having Patty Mills out there for 18 minutes.
It sure seems like it. I mean, I don't know what we're getting from Mills at this point. Like, the defense is terrible. Like, he can't create his own shot. Yeah, I don't know. This isn't even a hot take. I don't even know.
No. And I'll go a step further. I'll go a step further, not to create a hot take about it. I'll go a step further and say that in matchup to matchup basis, it probably makes more sense to be using Yuta Watanabe for stretches than Day'Ron Sharpe. Like, it makes more sense for them to go to this Ben Simmons at the 5 scenario. And then if you have Yuta Watanabe and players X and Y, you can have Kevin Durant out there, you can have Kyrie, or one of those stars. Having Yuta Watanabe with his size and his perimeter shooting and just enough athleticism to do the things that you need, that combination with any other 2 players, if you put one superstar with Ben and him, it makes a lot. I'll be hard pressed for you to give me a 5-man lineup that Yuta's in where you go, oh God, Yuta's just going to really kill us here, especially over what your other options are right now.
Doesn't seem like it, and at least he's a little longer. I wouldn't be shocked if we started just to see this go this direction a little bit more. I don't know if they're getting like a veteran sort of like veteran bump with Patty Mills or just like what they got from him last year. But the shooting just isn't, even when he's on, I don't know if the shooting's good enough to make up for even just what you don't get even what you don't get at the defensive end. And so
let's close. You want to close out here on this one last one? Sorry, finish your thought, but we can close.
No, that was it. Yeah.
The last one just being from Khalid. Do you think we need a backup point guard? If so, who do you suggest? Listen, yes, I think they need a secondary another ball handler in this rotation, obviously, because Patty Mills is partially one of those. He can't do it. You don't want him to do it. Seth Curry can do a bit of it, but he's, again, not a pure point guard. If you're in the roster, you're looking at Alondes Williams and David Duke Jr.
I think maybe you're thinking maybe Edmund Sumner too. Like if you could get, if Edmund Sumner can get, he looked, I mean, he didn't play very much. Excuse me, I just burped. He didn't play very much tonight, but I mean, where he was in there, he looked like he was shot out of a cannon. It still looked, I was a little surprised he came in. He's definitely not the point guard you're thinking of.
By the way, four of 6 in 6 minutes. I mean, the guy
get into the lane like against Giannis, like trying to finish at Giannis. Like I think that there's a world where he becomes something more than what he is now. I mean, this guy, 33% from 3 for his career, not many attempts, so it's not something that he does a ton. But he, among like the rest of the, among the rest of the group, at least like when he has the ball, it still kind of looks out of control to me, and it doesn't look perfect. But maybe more time getting back into like basketball flow. He's definitely fast as lightning. Like he's so fast. Yeah. He was shot out of a cannon when he played tonight, and so I could see him working his way more into it. It's not your traditional point guard role. I'm not even sure it's a connector kind of guy, but there's confidence there. I think there's like the willingness to try to like want to be pretty aggressive. I think those two things for the Nets are really important. Like if you are a guy that wants to be aggressive and try to get to the rim, try to get it on transition, just be confidence enough to take threes. And he definitely seems to have that. They're not going in, but he has like he will take them. Like he's taken a couple end of the shot clock threes. I could see him working into that role. I don't know if that's the exact kind of guy that I don't know who asked that question. Sorry. Whoever it was. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if like that's what you meant, but I could see him turning into something at some point. Like I'll tell you right now, at some point the Nets are going to have an injury and he's just going to play more. Like I think just by that, like there's guys get hurt, someone's going to get hurt, and he's just going to back-to-backs. I mean, who even knows what they do on the back-to-back? These guys played a ton of minutes tonight. Maybe we see him more tomorrow.
And that, well, the other interesting point I was going to make was, Cam Thomas doesn't play at all. He walks in the court for 1 minute to close this thing out. Whatever you think about Cam Thomas's game, now we'll see. We'll see what happens in this back-to-back, because maybe they're trying to balance who's going to be playing tomorrow, and maybe we'll see a little bit more Cam Thomas. But the early indications are, again, there's things that he's being asked to improve, and he's working on them. He's looked good at times. He's obviously the other guy that you would watch here in any type of capacity, just from a guard standpoint. Maybe not the issue. They've gotten longer, so maybe it does mitigate some of the being undersized here. Again, if we're talking about 18 minutes for Patty Mills, I would rather them go to Yuta. I'd rather them go to Sumner. I'd rather them go to Cam Thomas. You'd rather see some different things here, but only 4 games in. Again, another 4 games from now, we're going to see sample sizes on a lot of guys, and proof will kind of, I think, be in those results, because Sumner looked pretty clunky and out of place the first 2 times we saw him this season. Then tonight, looked dynamic, got some things done, and that's probably what you get. That's why they're bench and role players, because they're not guys that are consistent enough to be in your starting rotation night in, night out.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we'll see. I think this game against Dallas will be pretty telling too. It's the back-to-back. There was a lot of minutes for some of these guys. I don't know what the motivations are right now, being 1-3. It's a tough matchup against Luka, who looks as good as he's ever looked this season. And we just knew this was going to be a very tough stretch of games. Like, this is not surprising. It's not surprising to me at all that this is where they are, like sort of record wise. It's disappointing. Like, you would like it to be different. I thought the Mavs were 2-1. They're 1-2. Lost to the Pelicans the other night.
And just real quick here too, because we'll close out. Mavs, then they get 2 games at home against the Pacers, and then Chicago,
which should both be wins. Those should be the Pacers stink.
100%. And then you get the Washington, who's a different team than they've been in the past, whatever. But you also get Charlotte. So these next six games or so, to your point, you played the Pelicans, you played the Raptors, the Grizzlies, and the Bucks. All teams with expectations, all quality players. And the one thing I didn't say earlier in the podcast, which I thought was worth noting, the one difference, if you look at those 4 games, they got 1 win against the Raptors. While I love a lot of the players on Toronto, you would say that the other 3 teams have real legitimate superstars on their rosters. The Nets are losing to superstar-led teams. They've gotten a win against a team that essentially does not have that one truly dynamic take over the game player. which I think is something maybe they could be telling here when they play Luka and then get into some the lesser teams.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. So we're going to be back again. Thanks for everyone for jumping into YouTube. Really appreciate all these comments. I did not get to read them all here, but just because they were flying in so fast, but really appreciate everyone that jumped in. And we're going to be back again, win or lose against Dallas tomorrow night or tonight, depending on when you listen to it. We'll be back following that game as well. So jump back in, win or lose, we'll be here. Really appreciate it.
See you next time, friends. I got to figure out a better ending for these.